Earlier in the course, we defined what it means to be learner-centered. And then we discussed how the COVID-19 pandemic accelerated a shift towards alternative learner-centered assessments where students produce knowledge. These forms of assessment are complex and challenging, but they also avoid some of the worst challenges presented by online proctoring. Now, in this video, let's define what we really mean by authentic assessment. And we're going to start this process of definition by looking at the 9 principles of good practice for assessing student learning. In this opening principle, the first, the authors state that the assessment is most effective when it's a multidimensional activity revealed in performance over time. There is a focus on what students can do, especially in those assessment methods that call for actual performance. When we look at the definition for authentic assessments and authentic tasks, we'll see a lot of commonalities between this principle and the definition of authentic assessment. In Learning Outcomes Assessment, a Practitioner's Handbook, Goff et al. Give a very good definition of authentic assessment. Authentic assessment tasks require students to use skills, knowledge, and values and attitudes that they've learned in situations that simulate the performance context of the intended discipline or profession as closely as possible. In aligning assessment with outcomes, the degree to which assessment tasks simulate real-world problems and situations associated with their disciplines or professions, that's what measures its authenticity. Authentic assessment tasks, they ask students to complete things that are based in real-world relevance. And this real-world relevance capitalizes on a key component of Malcolm Knowles's adult learning principles, namely that adult learners want to be able to immediately apply new knowledge to real-life situations and problems. And I want to focus on that first phrase, as closely as possible to real-world activities. Authentic. In authentic assessment means creating a task that simulates the performance context of the discipline or profession as closely as possible. The operative words are degree and simulation and as closely as possible. Authenticity must be seen as an ideal that's practically impossible to reach in many settings. There's a difference between the relatively safe scaffolded educational environment and the real world. But what as closely as possible also means is that even if it's impossible to create a perfectly authentic assessment that matches real world conditions, there may still be room to make an authentic assessment, more closely resemble real world activities. The authentic task at its simplest is, what are we asking students to do? Assessment shapes the quality of learning and the quality of teaching because students do what is rewarded. For this reason, one must be sure to reward activities that encourage deep and meaningful approaches to learning. The other aspects of authentic assessment are more interesting and they can be more problematic. Authentic assessment tasks are ill-defined and open-ended, meaning that they can be solved through multiple approaches and allow for a diversity of outcome, mirroring what students will encounter later in life. One of my favorite assessments is the business case. Students need to present a strategic rationale for a new product or a new service. To develop the business case, students need to develop a budget, a marketing plan, and a project implementation plan. All of these subtasks are part of the assignment. And while there are guides and templates available for what a good business case looks like, there's no right way or one way to complete the assignment. And so students are invited to be creative. This can be a bit frustrating for students who also want clear instructions without being given a clear answer. Showing student exemplars can be very effective here if current students don't try to copy what previous students have done. Authentic assessments take place over a sustained period of time. And many instructional designers recommend chunking assignments, giving feedback, and allowing students time to resubmit based on peer or instructor feedback. This is definitely recommended as an effective teaching practice. Authentic tasks provide the opportunity to reflect. John Dewey suggested that we possess certain habits of mind, and occasionally we need to interrupt these habits of mind. We have to reflect on our thought processes to see how they're working and to see whether or not our current thought processes are valuable. This is one of the more challenging aspects of authentic assessments because not all students are naturally reflective. So not all students know how to reflect. One successful approach that I've used is a process observer report in some of my team-based assignments. The process observer is one student whose role is to document how a final product came to be, recognizing that the process is often just as important as the product. Reflection might require some direct instruction on how to reflect, and another approach might be to ask students to submit a short appendix on what they believe they did well and how they would like to improve their assignment, or explain what they might have done differently and why. The opportunity to collaborate is a big piece of authentic assessments because how often do we work alone in the real world? The current workplace is geographically distant, team-based, and technologically mediated. And in many of these situations, collaboration is integral to the task. Rather, collaboration is integral to the task. It's not just the individual learner who's doing something. This social interactive nature of meaning and knowledge construction is a suitable teaching approach for many areas, but especially for the growing focus on essential employability skills such as communication, decision-making, gathering and managing information, interpersonal skills, teamwork, conflict resolution, and personal skills. The authentic task, after all of these collaborative parts, must also create a polished product that has value in its own right and allows for competing solutions. Authentic assessments serve the interests of students by encouraging learners to play a more active role in the assessment of their own learning. Authentic assessments are especially important for distance educators because most distance learners live and learn in the world of work. These learners benefit from those assessments that, as closely as possible, replicate the task or process that's being assessed. Authentic assessments are connected to adults' life circumstances, their frames of reference and their values, and they encourage participants to bring their authentic selves to the learning environment. If we were to take all of the 5 characteristics of authentic assessments and boil them down into 5 essential planning components, we would come up with the 5-dimensional framework for authentic assessment developed by Gillikers, Bastians, and Kirchner. The task we've already talked about a little bit. What ill-defined and open-ended task do students need to accomplish? The physical context. Where would they engage in this situation? Not all situations can be replicated online, but recognizing the limits of authentic assessment must be a starting point for creativity, not a discussion ender. What digital spaces or tools will they be working in, like Google Docs, Microsoft Teams, Slack, etc.? Social context. What kinds of relationships are the students going to be involved in? What kinds of power dynamics are involved in those relationships? The assessment, result, or form. This is the polished product that we've already talked about. This could take any number of forms, from a poster presentation to a house design. Finally, the criterion standards. How will we judge quality? What are the elements that will go into our rubric? I now just want to tell a little bit of a story. I was part of an authentic assessment that I hope that this illuminates the definition of authentic assessment and the idea of authentic task and the 5-dimensional framework. And this comes from Medicine Hat College's Built Environment Engineering Technology program. In 2019, Medicine Hat College won a solar grant to build a solar classroom. Pictured here are students on their way to a community consultation to display their ideas. The task. We asked them to fulfill the request of the grant to design a solar classroom or a solar garden that was built harmoniously into the environment. A little context. So this is why this was important to us. At the time, the largest solar field had just been installed outside of Medicine Hat College, and there was some pushback from community members who thought that it was ugly. Others, both skeptics and proponents, were curious. How much energy does this field generate? Students worked in groups to create a polished product that really had a diversity of outcome, as you can see from some of the pictures here. The polished product that we were asking them to create was a set of design boards and a verbal presentation of their designs. Their designs were then shown off at a community consultation with local residents. And some student groups went in the way of the solar garden, some went in the way of the solar classroom, demonstrating both the polished product and the diversity of outcome. Students explained their ideas to industry and council representatives. They received feedback, and they were asked to refine their designs. This product exhibited almost all of the characteristics of an authentic task. It had real relevance, it was ill-defined, it required students to define subtasks, the board presentation, the verbal presentation, etc. They worked in teams most of the semester, and they had to reflect on the experience as the final part of their assignment. Reflecting, in this case, concerned what they had heard from the community about their designs. It was a polished product that had competing solutions. To conclude this story, this is the structure that ended up getting built. It's not as cool or as fancy as what students designed, but students created something of real value to our campus. And again, we come as close as possible to real-world conditions. There are plans to use this as an outdoor classroom or a bandstand for a summer concert series. And we strengthened our community connections by creating a learner-centered process where students created designs that were then assessed publicly. This is a worked example of the 5-dimension framework of authentic assessments that can be used for planning purposes. What's the complex, ill-defined tasks that students need to complete? In this task, students worked in a collaborative digital environment to manage the product. The social context was the project-based team. The products included designs and a community consultation, and the right-hand column outlines the major criterion and standards upon which they were judged by the faculty and the community. Now that we've defined authentic assessments, looked at the characteristics of authentic tasks, and looked at the 5 dimensions of authentic assessments using an example, it's time for you to participate in the discussion forums and reflect on how you can apply this in your courses by building a 5-dimensional framework for your assessments. Thank you.